Great. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to join us this morning, where we are going to be presenting the full year results for NCC Group's financial year ended 31st of May 2017. I have met several of you in the past, going back many years in some cases, but this is my first time to present in front of an audience, a city audience on behalf of NCC Group, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to explaining to you what we think we can do with the business over the next few months and years. I'm joined by Brian Tenner, who is the interim CEO of NCC Group. I joined on the 10th of April. Brian joined on the 1st of February 2017, and then on the 1st of March he received a battlefield promotion from CFO to interim CEO. And we've both of us been working very hard to get to grips with what this business has been doing, what the situation is that we should be, are there any problems we should be taking care of, and then what are the opportunities to look at going forwards. And today is the first time we'll be presenting any of that to you as analysts and shareholders. So yeah, it's been a tough year. For shareholders, it's been a particularly tough year. There has been significant underperformance in the business compared to original expectations. The business has not performed on the profit line, and despite continuing growth in revenues, that's not turned through to profits, and Brian will explain to you what has happened there. There have been some significant changes to the board and the executive team. I've already explained how the timing around Brian's appointment and my appointment. Obviously, this was prompted by the departure of the CFO, the CEO, and the chairman. The cost base, the reason we've not made the profits that we thought we were going to make is that the costs have run ahead of revenues. Just a simple lack of controls. And again, Brian will give you some good detail on that. And as a result, margins have fallen at both levels. Our gross margins have fallen and our net margins have fallen. So, not a pleasant year. But there are really significant opportunities for the business going forwards. We have carried out a strategic review of the business, and I'll be reporting on the findings of that today. We think there are some quick wins to be had from organising the business in a better, more customer-focused structure. And we are very encouraged by the opportunities that we see and the growth in order intake and the activity levels that we have across the business. All of which means that we're thinking that this business is going to show good growth with better margins in the short to medium term. Brian's going to take you through the numbers in more detail in a moment, but I just want to give you a few highlights and the key findings from the strategic review. So any incoming chairman is always going to want to get to grips with the basics of what we have, and that starts with saying, well, what do the markets look like and what do customers think about us? Well, our NCC has two businesses essentially, our escrow business, and the escrow business and the escrow market remains absolutely rock solid. No problems there. The cyber markets are very positive and showing very good growth, and the segments in which we compete, we've actually shown growth faster than the market, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We've spoken to customers. Customers like us. Our customer retention rates are good, and customers have said that they would like to buy more from us. We've spoken to the employees, and they also enjoy working at NCC Group. So all of that gives us a really good base from which to build a good, high-performing business. Now, our portfolio of businesses, following all the acquisitions over the last few years, pretty solid, but there is some portfolio reshaping that we need to do, and I'll talk about that later. The biggest issue in the business is actually not that dramatic. It's about the way we organize ourselves and manage ourselves. Having the right organizational model and then having the right business processes and the systems to support those business processes so that we can take advantage of the scale that we've reached. All of that has been lacking, really, over the last few years. The business has grown very well, both organically and by acquisition, but the boring stuff about getting the infrastructure and the processes and the systems in place that you need to manage that scale has not been done. And lastly, the only other key finding from the strategic review is that we have two businesses that don't really fit our model, the web performance and software testing businesses. They don't really fit a cyber theme, and we think they should be disposed of. So that's my highlights, and I'll hand over to Brian. As I hobble back.
Morning. Thank you very much, Chris. I am going to be moving at some pace because we've got quite a lot to get through today. Obviously, there'll be an opportunity for question and answer afterwards. And apologies if talking fast and being from Northern Ireland confuses some of you. So, financial highlights. Our core markets, as Chris has already mentioned, have stayed very buoyant all through the year. You can see it in the revenue growth figures. We've had growth in most of our geographies, in most of our service lines, and it's come through a mix of acquisitions, benefits of foreign exchange, but also some organic growth in there as well. Ordinarily, that would be the backdrop to announcing some nice improvements in profitability. But as Chris has already said, our costs actually grew ahead of our revenue. Those are direct costs influencing the gross margin and also indirect costs influencing the indirect margin. So costs basically grew too far ahead of revenue. They weren't necessarily wasted costs. Some of those are investment in good growth-related opportunities, but it could have been managed and timed in a better way. If you then look at the third chart there at the bottom, net debt, pleasant surprise for many people. We finished the year around £10 million better than expected. We still have significant opportunities to actually improve in this area. We've only really just started going on working capital, and it is worth mentioning that actually, in order to improve relationships with some of our supply chain, we actually paid a few million quid extra at the back end of the year. So that net debt figure, if we'd operated in the same way as last year, could have been lower still. So the business does have genuine opportunities to generate cash and improve our cash-generating models. Going over the page then to the income statement, I won't pull out a lot on here because we've actually got detailed bridges on a number of the key lines, but I will just point out some of the key things on here for you. First thing is a technical thing. In prior years, our support salaries have been classified as a cost of sale. We've actually reclassified them down into general administrative costs, which I think is a more appropriate place for them to sit. So if you're actually looking back at last year's statutory accounts, you'll see an adjustment in this year's numbers in respect of those, and it's a £21.2 million adjustment, as we mentioned there. I think the summary of the year is almost included in that fourth bullet there. If salaries are 70% of our cost base, which they are, and our average head count year on year rose by 16%, on top of that we had average salary inflation of around 7%, gets you roughly to a 23% increase in your salary costs. Well, if you've only got 13% sales growth, which is excluding FX, you can see you're always going to struggle to make extra money in a situation like that. And that, almost in one bullet or a nutshell, is a summary of what happened over the last 12 months. I would emphasize, though, those cost increases were about timing rather than actually being wasted. And just to emphasize again, that means we are not looking at a wholesale restructuring program. We're not looking at wholesale redundancies inside the business. Our markets are growing fast enough, the surplus capacity can be absorbed relatively quickly. It is also worth mentioning, it's been talked about previously, that there were a couple of contracts, one of which we already had people on the ground working on a client that was pulled in the first half of the year. If then, turning over the page to a bit more detail on revenue, and again, just to emphasize, we've excluded the domain services business in here because that business, the decision was taken to exit it at the very start of the year, and the last piece of it was sold in December, January of this year. So walking through the revenue bridge, you can see because of roughly 15% increase in the value of euros and dollars, we had an FX impact of £9.8 million on our revenue. The Fox IT figure is literally the benefit of owning Fox for 12 months. That's the first half revenue figure for Fox. So put that down as an acquisition benefit. The next two, PSC and VSR, are two small US bolt-on acquisitions we made during the year, and between them they contributed £7.1 billion to our revenue. If you then look at the 17.8 million green box, that is our underlying or cybersecurity services and consulting business. Very healthy growth. So having been through those green boxes, now turning to the red boxes. The first one, Fox High Assurance, excuse me. I think it's well publicised that after we bought the Fox business, the Dutch government got slightly worried about the fact that a business that protected part of its critical national infrastructure had just changed hands, and it hadn't known about it in advance and wanted to find out what had happened. It's fair to say we should have done a better job of talking to the Dutch government before that transaction and engaged with them. We've since done that work, and as a result of that, orders from the Dutch government are actually starting to unlock again. So yes, that was a negative impact of just over £3.5 million to revenue in the year. It could have been managed better, it should have been managed better, and it now is being managed better. And as I say, purchase orders are now starting to come through from the Dutch government, and would expect that red box to become green in the coming year. The last item on there, MSS products. MSS is what was known as the old Accumuli business. There was a big chunk of business in there that involved the resale of third-party products that were relatively no margin, didn't include any IP or know-how from NCC Group. If I put it into a context, in the first half of the year, we sold roughly £7.5 million of MSS products. In the second half, that fell by 90%, so almost £7 million lower in the second half. I won't say we wouldn't have liked the business, but it is a piece of business that we're not particularly interested in going forward. We would rather be selling products where they're linked to after-sales monitoring, consulting, professional services, or some sort of value add from NCC. The last point to make on this slide is you may be wondering why escrow doesn't appear on it. Of the FX increase, 1.8 million of that relates to escrow, so it's in there. Escrow actually did have organic growth of £1 million in the year, but that was all wiped out by a one-off issue around revenue recognition. There, the basic problem, which had built up over 3 or 4 years, was that revenue was being recognised in advance of service delivery. It was £1 million come the end of the year. That's now sitting on the balance sheet as deferred income. It's an opportunity to deliver it in 2018. There's never been any issues with the subsequent delivery of this revenue, but it was being recognised too early. And the impact this year, as I say, was to reduce escrow's revenue by £1 million, an almost identical impact on its EBIT, which is why escrow doesn't appear on the slide, because you get to a net nil. If we then go over the page to the adjusted EBIT bridge, again, we're excluding domain from this. You can see in the first 2 boxes the benefits of FX and also the 3 acquisition pieces rolled in together. So that's Fox, PSC, and VSR. The green box for organic is literally just taking the organic growth in the business of the 3 or 4% I've already mentioned and multiplying that by last year's gross margin. And that's the benefit that flows into the business. If you then turn to the next 2/3 red boxes, you can see where the value was being drained out of the business. So our gross margins across the group actually fell by 3.6%. And literally that £7.5 million is taking last year's revenue, dropping the margin by 3.6%, and you get a £7.5 million reduction in overall gross margin. In general and administrative costs, there are increases, you'll see a little bit more of this later, across a whole range of cost types. But it does include things like premises costs have increased, cost to support staff has increased. There are also a holiday pay charge in there, which I'll mention when we come on to individually significant items. And then the last point on here, depreciation and amortization increase in the year. That's lots of new systems coming into play either during the year or the full year impact of prior year spends on various systems. So all of that, the green boxes and the red boxes added together, gets you to a net 31% fall in adjusted EBIT. A very quick walkthrough then, reconciling GAAP information to non-GAAP information. We have included adjusted EBITDA on here because that's what the company was reporting on over the last 12 months or so. But I can say that going forward, our primary guidance KPI will be adjusted EBIT and not adjusted EBITDA. So reverting back to the way it was, except for the last 12 to 18 months. Just walking down through this, you can see the depreciation of tangible assets. That has increased. We haven't stripped out the impact of acquisitions in here, so some of that is around Fox, some of it's around the fit-out costs on new offices, some of which was obviously incurred to accommodate the growth in staff numbers and the growth in revenue that we were anticipating. Again, amortization of intangible assets has increased. Some of that's Fox, some of it's web, new products and services being brought to the market, and also corporate systems. So whether that's our finance system, which is being rolled out in more units, or that's our CRM system, which is being rolled out in more units, that's what's driving the increase in the amortization of intangibles. Other items to draw out on here are that lower share-based payments simply reflect underperformance in the year compared to the long-term incentive targets, and also the fact that there have been one or two senior leavers and the charges in respect to their LTIPs reverse out. Acquired intangibles, the reason it's gone up in the year by over 40% is you've got a full year charge for Fox. Last year, as I mentioned, we only owned it for 6 months, and you've also got a part year charge for PSC and VSR this year. The last line, individually significant items. Some of you may be more familiar with that to include exceptional items. If we go over the page, I'll just walk you through. That's £71 million of charges in the current year. If you look at the top 3 items there, they're all in respect of goodwill. It's not a typo. It is the case that the charge in respect of writing down Accumuli goodwill and Fox IT goodwill are both £24.3 million. I was saying to Chris last night, it is surprising the number of times you see 2 identical numbers on slides when you're giving these sorts of presentations. If you want to know the background to that, fundamentally, if you think about what we've described in terms of business performance this year, a lot of it has focused, if you remember those 2 red boxes, both in Fox, in High Assurance, and also in Cumuli, those sales of products. It's also fair to say we're still trying to integrate those businesses. The integration so far has been limited. And also, it's also fair to say that we paid pretty full prices on acquisition for those 2 businesses. In context, that Accumuli write-off is roughly 50% of the goodwill on the acquisition, and the Fox write-off is roughly 35% of the goodwill on acquisition. The remaining parts of those businesses are still attractive. They've got good prospects, but it will take time to deliver that value. So in the circumstances, it was felt sensible to make those impairments. Similar position with respect to web. Slower than anticipated or slower than expected growth in some of the new products that web was bringing to market. So those are the 3 goodwill write-offs. Running down through that list then, domain services, the decision was taken to exit that at the start of the year. There were significant write-offs last year. The write-off there is in respect to the .trust top-level domain name. We will be aiming to realize value from that, but given the uncertainty on the value, we've taken the decision to write it off to nil. If you then look at capitalized development costs, I know these have been an area of focus for many people in the past. We had a residual piece of domain software sitting in our books at the start of the year of £2 million. That piece of software is not going to be of use in the business and has now been written off in full. And finally, because of the slow take-up of some of those web performance products, we've also impaired some of those to the tune of £3.2 million. Other things are relatively self-explanatory here. I think I've explained to many people before the vacation pay. Literally, the company just hadn't booked a vacation pay provision, and that actually dates back to 2005 with the transition to IFRS. I should emphasize the current year charge is included in normal operating charges, and that's £500,000. This charge on here represents all the prior year catch-ups, and we felt it was important to bring it out and separately identify it. Change in deferred considerations in the current year is driven by FX, the appreciation of the euro that I mentioned. And the last thing to draw out here, property relocation costs. That includes double running costs for some offices. You'll be aware we're moving our Manchester office. There's an exit cost there, and also we're writing off some fixtures and fittings in that building when we move to our new head office. The last point to say here is that for the avoidance of doubt, you can see it in the footnote underneath the table, almost 68.5 million of those write-offs are non-cash. And of that 68.5, only the change in deferred consideration, the 2.9 million, is expected to turn into cash. So significant write-offs, but mainly non-cash. Turning to tax and dividends, the chart on the top left for 4 years paints a very boring, consistent picture of a tax rate just over 20%. The reason it was so low is that our domain services business was based in the United States and basically suppressing any profit there. Because domain has now closed down, you've got actual profitability being uncovered, if you like, or no longer shielded in the United States, which means we actually do have exposure to almost 40% tax rate in the US, 34% federal and local state taxes as well. That 29.3 is actually lower than the guidance at the interims, which I think was 31%, and that's literally because back in January when interim guidance was given, the expected profitability in America was higher than we eventually delivered. So that's it on the tax line, and we'd expect our tax charge going forward to be around the 30% mark. You'll see when Chris speaks later that our US business is actually doing very nicely, so we do expect to stay exposed to higher rates of tax in the US. But we have appointed a group tax manager for the first time in our history, who's actually going to have the task of making sure we stay compliant and also that we optimize our tax, but within a low risk tax appetite. Turning to dividends, the business, you saw earlier the free cash flow generation numbers, cash generative. We've got good financing in place all the way through to 2020. We are confident in the recovery of the business, and therefore we're going to be maintaining the dividend at the same level as last year. That equates to 4.65 pence, which is a final of 3.15 pence. Going forward, policy and coverage we will keep under review. One final point on dividends. It's a historical technical issue. Fundamentally, it's a housekeeping issue. Ordinarily, most groups, subsidiaries, will declare dividends and flow it all up to the parent company. We as a group haven't gone through that housekeeping exercise over the last 4 or 5 years. That's meant that we've discovered that dating back to 2011, 12, 14 and 17, there are 4 dividend payments which on the face of it were invalidly declared, i.e. the parent company did not have enough distributable reserves to make those payments. At all times there was very significant surpluses of reserves in the subsidiaries which should have been flowed up, as I mentioned, because of that housekeeping point. We're expecting to resolve this issue through a shareholder circular and through appropriate resolutions at our AGM. Hasten to add, it is just a technical issue, but an evidence of poor housekeeping. Turning to cash flow and net debt, I did say this was a good outcome for us, being roughly £10 million ahead of expectations, and that's, as I say, despite paying more of our creditors within their normal terms. Again, just picking out the bigger items on here. Acquisitions on there, 26.5 million. That is the first of 2 deferred payments for Fox, 12.5 million euros, and it's also the purchase of the initial purchase prices for PSC and VSR. Should say there's also included in there final contingent payments in respect of Fort and also some retention bonuses in respect of the Accumuli business, which was bought back in 2015. If you look at the tangible capex line then of 6.9 million, the gross number sitting behind that is actually 11 million pounds. We did receive a capital contribution from our new landlord for the Manchester head office of 3.7 million, and also we sold off very small pieces of tangible fixed assets for a profit of 400,000 pounds, which is how you get to that net 6.9 million of cash flow. Software capex and capitalized development costs, if we can just be clear on the definitions that we're now using in the business. Software capex are items of software that are for use inside our business. So they include licenses, they include consulting costs, and they do include some internal costs of development, but they're fundamentally for systems that we use to run our business. Capitalized development costs, in contrast, is all about pieces of software that are being developed to actually generate income. Revenue streams, selling products and services to our customers, and that's a distinction between those two. Our total capex next year is expected to be flat on 2018. That's because the capex we spent on the Manchester office this year was effectively fully offset by the capital contribution from the landlord. In 2018, we expect the cost to complete that office move to be another £4 million, but that in itself will be offset by 3 or 4 other office moves we made this year that won't repeat. In the following year, 2019, you'd therefore expect capital expenditure, all else being equal, to fall by 3 or 4 million. So flat next year, and then a fall of 3 to 4 million. All of that adds up to a cash conversion ratio of 77%. It is included in the appendix. The definition is transparent. The source of the numbers is transparent. And I won't go through it just now, but as I say, the outcome, when you run through that calculation, gets you a cash conversion of 77%. And it's broadly adjusted EBITDA compared to net cash flow from operating activities. In terms of targets for next year, we expect a small handful of millions of net cash outflow in the year ahead. The balance sheet is really included here for completeness. There isn't a whole lot to say about it. You can see the fall in intangible assets, which looks significant. Bear in mind the context of those impairments that I mentioned earlier, slightly offset by some increases driven by foreign exchange and the new or the current year acquisitions. Provisions appear on there for the first time. What's in that provisions number? The 3.7 million capital contribution from the landlord and also 1.3 million rent-free allowance for the Manchester office. Both of those amortise over the 12 years through to the first break clause in that new office. So that's the background to that new figure on there. And basically, the net debt figure, you can see it's gone up roughly 31 million in the year. And almost all of that, if not all of that, is reflected in acquisitions in the year, the deferred payments in the year, and actually the dividends that have been paid. Just turning to a couple of slides now on divisional performance. Again, this is the assurance chart, and you can see it's very much, given that it's 80% of the group, what Chris and I have already talked about earlier in terms of revenue growth, not equaling growth in margins. It's the same picture on here. So you can see revenue in assurance growing from 168.9 million to 204.7, but margin actually a very significant fall from 15.3% to 8.1%. And similar to that simple summary I gave at the group level about salary costs, if you look at the third bullet down, salary costs in the division grew 44%. Compared to sales, who were actually up 23%. So very much the same theme of costs rising ahead of revenue. Indirect costs also went up. Some of that was in respect of new infrastructure. I have to confess, on joining the business and finding out they were moving quite so many offices all at the same time and expanding the size of them was a little bit of a shock. So I'm looking forward to a break from that in the new year, where we have the Manchester move planned and also a Cheltenham office move, which is already underway, but not looking at any others. But in terms of short-term goals for the assurance division, we are looking to immediately start rebuilding that margin in 2018 and to reverse the declines that we've seen. The aim would be to add a couple of percentage points to the EBIT margin in the assurance division. Going over the page then to escrow. You can see on a reported basis, there's the 1.8 million of growth. That's what I mentioned earlier, that was in respect of foreign exchange. It is worth just emphasizing the £1 million revenue recognition correction in escrow, because of the size of escrow, actually has a disproportionate impact both on its revenue, because it's worth 2 or 3 percentage points of revenue. It also has a disproportionate impact on its profitability. If you look at the top bullet there, we actually saw very good organic growth in the US. That's obviously excluding the impacts of foreign exchange. In Europe, it was a more mixed performance. It was actually slightly down if you exclude foreign exchange, but we did have some significant change and turnover in our staff in our European escrow offices. And the UK business, excluding the revenue recognition issue, was flat on the prior year. Renewal rates inside escrow continuing to run around the 89–90% level. And again, similar to assurance, we're expecting margin recovery, or we're going to deliver margin recovery in 2018. Again, a couple of percentage points on EBIT. Finally, the third leg of the business, if you like, non-income generating. Just to emphasize, these are central and corporate costs. This is not the cost of some white elephant head office and helicopters for Chris or I. We genuinely incur a lot of costs centrally and then recharge them out into the business units. Some of the analysis in the preliminary statement, you can actually see the size of the recharge going into the business units. And that covers things like IT systems, some marketing costs, etc. You'll also find that most of our rental payments are actually incurred and collected centrally and then farmed back out. Again, you can see the cost increases across a broad range of categories. We can't point at one category and say it's all down to that when you're looking at indirect costs. I would say as well, though, if you look at marketing, our marketing spend traditionally has been relatively low, if not very low, and it is an area we know we need to increase our spend, but also make sure it's spent wisely and targeted in the right areas. In terms of expectations for 2018, we should expect a £2 million increase in premises costs, so not just rent and rates, but also associated office infrastructure costs. A significant part of that is the new Manchester office, which does accommodate 400 of our staff, so it is a big undertaking. But you also have the full year impact of some of those office moves that I talked about that have been completed in the current 2017 year. Amortization, I think I've already talked about and why that went up during the year. So you can see, similar to the business units and the frontline service delivery units where costs went up ahead of revenue, you've also got some quite chunky increases in central and corporate costs. So just to close, looking at current trading and outlook, it's obviously very early in the financial year. However, we did have some decent momentum exiting last financial year. And I can say that, unlike in some other years, the business wasn't scrambling to make a number this year. So we didn't pull forward revenue out of June or July or August or whatever in order to deliver the full year. That will provide some support to a quarter, which is actually typically not particularly strong for us as a business. Our markets are continuing to grow. We are seeing some early traction from refocusing our sales teams, and that's more towards strategic selling, integrated selling, solution selling. We do expect escrow, as I said, to return to low single-digit growth rates in the year, and also to see a couple of percentage points added to its margin. Web and software testing, we have said we're going to dispose of those in the coming year. For comparative purposes, in the year just past, we made 2.7 million of EBIT from those businesses. Assume that those businesses will actually be sold in the second half of the year. Whether that's early or late obviously remains to be seen, but it will be, we'll be targeting to have sold those businesses in the second half. In the assurance business, we're expecting that business to deliver high single-digit rates of growth, which, for the purposes of this, does include web and software testing until they've gone. And we also expect to add a couple of percentage points to the assurance margins. in 2018. Going in the opposite direction, the headwinds I've already mentioned, overhead costs primarily around rent and rates, and also some higher depreciation and amortization charges, all of which nets to the board's expectations for adjusted EBIT in 2018 to be in line with current expectations. And I'll hand back to Chris.
Thank you, Brian. So for the next 15, 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about the review that we've done and what we found in the review, and then I'll talk about what we're going to do about it. So what are the actions that we're putting in place to move the business forwards? So the first thing is, well, you know, the market, we wanted to make sure that we had a decent market that we were operating in, and it's pretty significant. We have put a lot of work into analysing the market, supported by a consulting firm called OC&C, and we're pretty confident that the addressable market for us in the segments we are, in the geographies in which we're operating, are around about $38 billion. So we're some way off hitting headroom limits in our addressable markets. The cyber markets that we're addressing are growing at double-digit rates across when we look at them in aggregate. And when we look at the fit between what we're offering and what customers want to buy, it's a really good fit. In the UK, the Netherlands, and the segment. So the US is still quite a geographically segmented market, and we are geographically segmented ourselves, but we have really good reputation and presence in the areas of the US where we operate. We drilled into current customer behaviors by doing 38 in-depth in-person interviews with some of our larger customers, and then a survey of over 500 customers. So we really wanted to understand what they were telling us, not just hear from our salespeople what they're saying. And some good news came back. You know, we score very highly on the customer's key purchasing criteria, particularly technical expertise. All of the customers single out that the reason they want to buy from NCC is because we really know what we're doing, compared to other choices that they have. There's a concept of net promoter score that you may have come across from other businesses, and we asked them to give us their views on, would you recommend NCC to businesses in a similar position to yours? And the net promoter score for us is plus 28, which is very positive. We also talked about how do you buy, and it was very clear that the customers, even the large global customers, are still thinking about local support for these issues. They want to work with people who have significant local presence. So all of that gets into thinking about, well, how do we organize ourselves? How do we take better value or create better value for customers in these local businesses whilst building global scale? And a lot of customers pointed out that the reason they like us is there is nobody else really like us, with the scale to be believable when they have a serious cyber issue, but without being tied to either a big system house, a big generalist system house, or a big hardware vendor, or a big cyber software security vendor. We are seen as a scaled up, credible, independent provider of cybersecurity advice and services. When we looked across the portfolio, well, in the UK in particular, when I look down the customer lists for the escrow business and the assurance business, the same customer names come up pretty regularly. But when you drill into that, that is genuinely accidental, not causal. It's just a fact of our scale in the two markets in the UK. You know, we have really significant market share in the escrow market in the UK, so it's not surprising that a lot of those of our assurance customers are also escrow customers. But the customers tell us that there is no value to them in thinking about buying those products from us as a bundle. So drilling further into the escrow business, though, it became clear that this is it's cracking business. And we manage it very well. So it's 145, 150 people delivering very targeted, very successful services, a solution that solves a very clear problem for customers, and we do it very well. We do it better than anybody else, and that's reflected in the margins that we enjoy in the UK. And those margins and profits have a really important stabilizing effect on the business. I mean, you've all been involved with this business longer than I have. Essentially, the cyber assurance business has been grown on the free cash flow delivered by the escrow business. And I think that's a really positive thing for shareholders, and we see that that positive relationship continues at the moment. But drilling again, if you take the same thinking and say, well, who is the best owner of these businesses? Well, there's no better owner of the escrow business that I can see, but we can see that there would be better owners of our web performance and software testing businesses. Other people will be able to do more with those businesses than we can today. And when we think about the amount of work there is to do to change processes and improve performance in our business that we'll talk about in a moment, we don't want to waste time trying to make those businesses better, knowing all the while that they don't really belong in our portfolio. So we're moving them on sooner rather than later. So a bit more of a look at the security markets. So the blue writing, security testing, incident response, process and governance and monitoring, and then down the side, the threat intelligence. Those are the core services that NCC Group offers today in the cybersecurity markets. We have a teeny bit of operation in a fully outsourced IT security world, a little bit that came with the Accumuli business. But the size of those segments altogether add up to 38 billion. And the growth rates, now unfortunately it's not really statistically credible to try and drive the growth rates into each of the segments, but the growth rates of the markets as a whole are completely believable, and the UK is growing at 9.5% a year, US 12.1%, the Netherlands 7.4%, and the rest of the world markets that we're addressing about 8.5%. So these are really healthy market growth rates in large segments. Gives us lots of growth headroom available. Now, I used to work for Bain & Company. I'm a strategy consultant by training, therefore I have to have a slide that needs lots of explanation. And here it is. So one of the ways we've tried to think about our portfolio of portfolio services is to say, well, what's the stickiness of the product? So how sticky is the service? Is it a recurring revenue type service? And then how differentiated are we in what we offer? And obviously the most valuable businesses are recurring revenue businesses, very sticky businesses, where you have a high degree of differentiation. That's where you tend to see high margin, super premium products and high performance businesses. So we've got some of that. And the size of the bubbles on this chart refers to the revenue of the size of our revenues in 2017. So our escrow business, actually the level of differentiation is pretty low, but our level of execution compared to others is really high. We execute that business really well. And frequency of purchase is pretty good. Retention rates in our escrow business remain very high, and we sign 1, 2, or 3 year contracts with our customers. Our most differentiated products, first of all, our incident response offering. So incident response is brilliant business, but it's entirely unpredictable. So this is when somebody is hacked or popped in the industry jargon, which I have quickly learnt. And this is when the chief security officer of, it might have been TalkTalk, would call up and say, the world is falling around my feet. We need help now with lots of bodies now. We have the scale to be able to respond to those kinds of challenges because of the scale we have, and we put together virtual teams from our operations around the world. And it's really high margin business, but of course, I have no way of predicting when the next one's going to come in. So unfortunately, that's my most left-hand little bubble. High assurance, this is the business driven out of Fox IT. This is the stuff that we deliver to the Dutch government. And then the other bubbles you can see dotted around. Bottom left, this is the Accumuli product reselling business, entirely transactional relationship with customers. They will shop around for whoever is willing to ship them a box at the lowest margin. It's not that interesting, to be honest. So our strategy, very simply over time, is to focus on the bubbles where we have greater differentiation and to try and move everything up and to the right through lengthening our customer relationships, selling more recurring revenue, and driving greater differentiation into our products. But that's a really good place to start. Now this slide, when I was going through the numbers with Brian in the first couple of management meetings that we had, I said, look, there's something really quite odd and interesting going on in this business, and we need to make sure that shareholders understand what's going on. So I can possibly tell you how to take away all the things you're going to hear from us in this presentation, but as the person charged with driving this business forwards, for me, this is the most important slide I've got to share with you, so please pay attention. So we're showing the growth rates ordered in size of revenues for the business. So our single biggest line of revenue is our UK professional services business. So the work that we do on a day rate basis or some recurring revenues for clients in the UK. Those revenues, with no impact of acquisitions, no impact of FX, grew 19%. Our second biggest chunk of revenues is the same stuff in the US. Those revenues, without the impact of the little acquisitions that we've made, and without the FX tailwind, grew 24%. Now, Fox gets a bit messy because we didn't own it for a full year, so this is just the second half. But Fox has two businesses in it. It's got the high assurance business, which is where we're selling extremely important stuff for the Dutch government. Well, those revenues cratered, down 53%. But the rest of Fox grew 17%. I'll come back to the Fox bit in a moment. MSS, the same story, the old Accumuli business. The hardware reselling business, Brian already explained this to you, down 48%. You know, that's not really strategically that important to us. The rest of Accumuli, the monitoring services, the recurring services, the consulting business, up 17%. And then lastly, Fort, our business in Denmark, up 22%. So there's a huge amount of noise in last year's numbers because there was so much going on, and there was, you know, obviously the profit performance was appalling, and we have to get that right. But it's important that everybody understands that the core service lines that we offer, our core businesses, are growing, and they're growing at pretty interesting rates. Now, the Fox HA business, high assurance business, high availability, high assurance. I've been involved in a number of situations where I've bought businesses that have either had national governments as clients, or in the US, you have a State Department as a client. And they are always terribly concerned about who is the new owner, because when you're doing something that's important and intimate, like cybersecurity, for a national government, they think of you as a government department. And very simply, what happened here is we didn't engage with that customer properly during the purchase process of Fox. And so a couple of months into the deal having completed, some civil servant in the Dutch government woke up one day and realized that some horrible Brits who were just about to do Brexit had bought this business. and that the Dutch government now had one of its key suppliers belonging to a British company. And what happens is they just go, stop. You know, we've got to understand what's going on. And that's what happened. Everything stopped whilst they looked at what had happened, got to grips with it, and now things have started again. And we are now getting purchase orders in that product line from the Dutch government. MSS product wasn't anything quite so dramatic. It's just we're not very interested, and nobody's pushing the sales of hardware boxes. So the other thing that's important is we are a professional services business, so it's really important that we know what people are thinking. My second day on the job, first day in Manchester, I sat down with the woman who leads our HR efforts. I said, okay, I'd like to go through the last few years' performance review data. And she said, oh, we don't do performance reviews. And my immediate response was, well, that's genius, because I hate doing them. It is one of the most boring things and hardest things to do, to sit down and try and say something useful, you know, do some coaching for the people that report to you. We didn't do them because it was all a bit hard. But you know, we are a professional services business. We sell the people who work for us. You have to look after that core resource of a business, and you can't do it properly unless you have a proper framework for telling people how well they're doing, how badly they're doing, where you want them to do more, where you want them to do less, what their training needs are. So this was the first time anybody had asked the staff at NCC, what do you think? Well, the great news is they are very happy. And the reason they're happy is because they're doing stuff they enjoy. We have a really strong correlation between people wanting to come to work at NCC because we're doing the stuff that they would want to do. So they're getting really good job satisfaction, and they like the fact that customers acknowledge our, and therefore their personal, technical expertise. That gives a lot of self-affirmation. So very good scores on employee sat and employee retention. Just a little bit more detail on the portfolio. I've made this point already. There is no business out there that is looking at our escrow business and thinking, I could get an instant 5 million synergies from owning that business. There isn't. We are the biggest player by a long, long way in this business in the UK. And it has all sorts of really positive benefits in a portfolio context. But cyber and web performance, we've talked about it. I'll just put the numbers there just for completeness. 9.3 and 17.3 of revenue, so 26.6 million revenue in total and 2.7 million in profit. Both businesses saw a bit of an uptick towards the end of 2017 and are trading okay at the moment. So I'm hoping that those disposal processes will go relatively smoothly. So what's the plan? That's the background on what we found. The plan. Well, we want to keep... slide back. We want to keep growing, but we want to grow with more discipline. This doesn't mean that we want to slow growth, but we need to be clearer about where we are growing. Which of our service lines do we really want to put the effort behind? And which do we think have the best opportunities? We want to implement a new target operating model. I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a moment, so I'll come back to that. We need to improve our systems and processes. We just don't have our hands on the levers to control this business in the way you would want to be able to control a 2,000-person professional service organization. There are huge gaps of information around key performance stats, around proper realization rates of professional services staff, and we just need to get that done. It's not rocket science. Plenty of other businesses do it. We just need to now get on and do it. Fourth thing we need to do is we need to lead the market. Brian referred to this when he was talking about the fact that we are underinvested in marketing. We are technological leaders. We are seen as thought leaders. We are the go-to firm for incident response in the UK and the USA. Our customer list is incredibly positive. We have the bluest of blue chip technology firms who use us as their cybersecurity consultants. And we're not doing enough to get that message out to a broader market. We need to put more energy and thought and money into leading the market. And then we need to develop our people. We're taking them a bit for granted at the moment, and we need to put more, again, money and resources into developing our people so that they feel that they can reach their full potential within NCC Group. Now, before I talk through the objectives, let me show you what our target operating model is. I'll come back. So this is our organizational model that we are currently implementing. Now, the first thing I'm not doing is I'm not showing you our current operating model because it genuinely is not, it's indescribable. It is not possible to put it down on paper and for it to make any sense whatsoever. It's a random set of relationships, many of them historical, many of them caused by acquisitions that have never been put together. But what we want to do is have a very clear, simple organizational model where the geography is the prime building block of our model, because the customers tell us very clearly over and over again that they want to buy and be served locally. But what they see as value in NCC Group is our global scale and the learnings that we can bring between the geographies. So the knowledge that we're developing with our threat intelligence work in the Netherlands is really valuable to our customers on the West Coast in the US. So we have a simple model of geographic heads of businesses with some horizontal folk driving alignment, integration, utilization, sharing best practice. A very simple, traditional matrix model that you will have seen in dozens of high-performance, very successful professional services firms around the world. The escrow business is a self-contained unit, so the new chief exec, when she or he is on board, will have the dark blue boxes as her direct report. All of those boxes are now filled, with the exception of a CHRO, and we remain in the market for a CHRO, and of course the CEO. So just going back one page, what do we get from all of that? Well, you align the business to how customers want to buy. So we're organized for their benefit rather than for our benefit. It allows us to leverage value between units. The matrix structure allows you to join up the service lines across geographic borders in a way that drives better value for customers. Delivers an integrated go-to-market proposition. Now, if we want to get the best from all of the acquisitions that we've made, we need to be able to sell those different propositions to the customers, but that means having a vertical integration within a country, a single sales organization with the capability to offer all of the different things that we have to sell. We then need scalable structures that allow that growth to turn into profitable growth. It's really, I keep saying it, the big things that we need to do at NCC Group are just not headline worthy. They're really quite dull. You know, we need to implement a fantastic new ERP system. We need to have better time recording. You know, it's not really headline grabbing stuff, but it's what we need in order to turn the IP that we have in the business, the market leadership that we have in the business, into profit for shareholders. And design and implement effective and efficient business processes. You know, I'm not an accountant, but the bit of our business that really ticks me off is our order-to-cash process is hopeless. And so the most offensive number in our balance sheet is the accrued income number. Accrued income, I understand as a non-accountant, is revenue for work that we've done, completed, the customer signed it off, and we've not been able to get the bill out the door. And that number at the moment is about 17 million quid. You know, that's 17 million of our money that the customers should be willing to give us, and it's just sitting there. So again, not very sexy, but it will make a substantial difference. So, how long is all that going to take? Well, we've started. The big blue box at the bottom is self-help. I mean, it's not. We've got to get this stuff done. We've got to get the operating model done. We've got to design and implement the new processes. We've got to get some training and development in place. All of that will drive up gross margins. The key point, the key value for shareholders from the new operating model is to drive up gross margins. White space work is then the cross-selling, making sure that the fantastic stuff that we've bought in the Netherlands, that we've recently acquired in the US, is offered to customers around the world. And then over time, maybe 2019 onwards, we could think about expanding the footprint, thinking about what other geographies are there where we could have the similar kind of position that we have in the UK, US, and the Netherlands. But the medium term is to rebuild our EBIT margin as a function of getting gross margins going back in the right direction and getting better control of our discretionary expenditure. So the next steps to make that happen. First, recruit a new chief executive. We've started, and the search is in the market, being carried out by one of the large global firms. We have started implementation of the target operating model. That's underway. As I said, the dark blue boxes are all filled, and that team are working together on the next layers down. We need to get better system. We've started the work on the processes and systems, utilization and realization. So, you know, vocabulary isn't usually that exciting a subject to talk about, but realization is a different measure of how much money you get from a professional services person than utilization. Utilization just tells you whether they're doing work. It doesn't tell you whether they're doing work that a customer is paying good money for. That measure is realization. And today, we simply do not have the ability to get accurate data about realization. Those insights, those key performance indicators, are the things that we need to be able to control to start driving gross margin in the right direction. And then we need a better go-to-market model. We want to be organized around the things our customers want to buy, which is driven by customer type and then the products that we have. But having that within a well-thought-through, joined-up framework should allow us to improve the rate of cross-selling and reduce the wasted cost of pushing stuff to customers that they're never going to buy. And then we have some great recurring revenue products that we got with the Fox acquisition and the Accumuli acquisition. Recurring revenues from doing ongoing monitoring and management of customers' systems, looking out for, threat scanning. And we've not done enough in that space yet. Leverage our strong technical reputation. Customers recognize this and value it, and you've seen in the growth numbers, they keep buying more of our good stuff. So we want to take all of that, manage ourselves better, which will reverse the gross margin trend that you've seen over the last few years, see gross margins starting to tick up, control costs, and all of that should turn into growing profits and better cash for shareholders. Thank you. So we're now going to take questions, and somebody will run around with, I don't know if we need the microphones, but we'll give it a go. We do need the microphones for the recording. Thank you.
Hi, it's Daud Khan from Canaccord. Three questions, really. Great slide on the various growth rates in the bits of the business that you've got. I'm just wondering, with the guidance that you've given for kind of assurance growth of high single digit, the numbers that you show on that slide, certainly for the growth areas, are significantly higher. The bits which are declining look like they, at least the Fox bit, should be kind of growing this year. So I'm wondering why the guidance is actually so low, at sort of the mid to high single-digit growth for assurance. That's question one. Second question is around employee attrition rates. I think in the release it showed about 21%, which is significantly higher than we were led to believe historically for the attrition rates. I'm just wondering if there's a change of definition or whether it varies by bits of the business. And the third question is historically for NCC, they've had some issues around ERP installations. You talk about the kind of refresh of the systems, but how easy is that to do? Because it's clearly been difficult for the business to date. Thanks.
If I talk about the first one,
Sure.
you talk about the other two.
Yeah.
So part of the cost of driving in this new operating model and the new processes will be that we will have a period of time where employees get a little bit inwardly focused, and that will impact growth rates because they'll be spending a bit more time thinking about who's my new boss, who are my new colleagues, how does it all fit. That is a cost of investment. If we don't do it, we'll never have the strong foundations to allow the business to grow profitably in the future. And so I do expect that will dampen growth as we go through the implementation period, and we've tried to reflect that in expectations. I don't think it's a long-term thing, but I do think it's going to be a short-term impact.
It's worth just adding that that overall assurance figure includes web and software testing, whereas Chris was obviously talking about the retained portfolio, so you'd expect to see a bit of dampening because they've got lower growth rates in there. In terms of employee attrition rates, the figure quoted in the release is a very simple calculation of whoever was in post at the start of the year, how many of them had left by the end of the year. So it's transparent, it's accurate. It isn't... if it's different from prior calculations, I think some of the new joiners made their way into prior calculations. So certainly we have no sense that our attrition rate has changed, but that's the methodology we'll be measuring it by going forward. I suspect it was slightly different in the past. And then in terms of ERP systems, it's a bit like most things, just focusing on doing it, knowing what good looks like. We do not need to actually throw out the Sage X3 system we've got as a back office system. It's reasonable for what it does. We effectively have three major systems: CRM, front end facing, ERP, internal business processes, and then sitting in the middle, if you like, the planning and scheduling tool for all of our staff. The one that sits in the middle is homegrown. It's actually probably of the three the best implemented and the most effective, but it is homegrown and we do need to review it. The back office system, ERP, it's sad to admit that we've been on that journey for 5 years on that system. That's a system that could have been rolled out in 2 or 3 years. So it's one of my priorities over the next 12, 24 months, get it rolled out wall to wall in all of our locations and full depth of the different applications for it, and actually get it finished, because the benefit comes when it's finished, not when it's 70% done, not when it's 80% done.
Yeah, Brian, just wanted to touch on the 2017 sales teams spike in terms of cost of sales. Because I've noticed obviously cost of sales has gone up, and certainly it gone up as a percentage more than the revenue lines.
Yeah.
But elements of it have been moved out now, as you said, in terms of properly reflecting cost of sales. So interested to sort of get a bit more colour around that. What's being done in terms of sales teams, commission structures? Because obviously there's revenue recognition you've mentioned has been an issue. So I'm guessing that's sort of part of that as well.
There's 2 or 3 different things in there. The first thing is the business genuinely got that we needed to be less transactional in our sales approach. Historically, NCC had been extremely transactional. However, we then approached that last year, particularly in the first half of last year, in an uncoordinated way. So all the different business streams rushed out and started to acquire strategic sales people and strategic account managers. So rather than having one integrated, let's do this in a sensible way, each of the businesses was almost building its own sales teams. So that's part of the reason for those costs going up faster than revenue. So a genuine problem that needed to be addressed. Unfortunately, we tried to fix it in 4 or 5 different ways rather than having one integrated solution. It's fair to say also in the escrow business that the guys experimented with, experimented might be too strong a word, but tried a new model which didn't actually work and it got backed out. So you had a cost spike in escrow during in the middle of last year, which had worked its way out by the end of this year. So again, we should see some benefit from lower costs on the sales side in escrow going forward. In terms of changing the commission models, the business, basically commissions, KPIs drive behaviors. You need to target the right behaviors. And our sales teams, our senior sales teams today are redesigning and indeed for all of escrow have already rolled out new structures that are targeting the sorts of revenue and repeat business that we want to see. But that is still a work in progress in parts of assurance.
Hi, Ken Rumph from Jefferies. Firstly, Rob had perhaps presented an idea that he'd built this business and a lot of the people were closely connected to him. In terms of, you talked about the general staff turnover point, but at the kind of top levels of the business, has there been significant change over the last few months?
The simple answer is no. I would say that a number of our senior people, in some ways the sun has come out for them and they've started to flourish. Rob, when he had his hands on most aspects of control of the business, obviously was leading from the front. And when you do that, you sometimes don't know what your lieutenants are capable of. So I think it's fair to say a number of the senior guys in the business are enjoying the opportunity to put forward their ideas and drive the business forward.
Okay.
So just one true point on that. So I said earlier that there was no company-wide performance review system, which is absolutely true. However, as I've been going around the business, I've found a couple of units which were doing performance reviews, and they would tell us we had to do it under the radar so that Rob wouldn't find out.
Okay. A specific point on web performance and software testing. The 2.7 is before central costs. I'm just trying to work out, as and when you sell it, does that mean that the buyer gets, so to speak, 2.7 million of cost? Does it leave you with some costs that have to be absorbed by the rest of the business or premises? How separable is it?
It's highly separable. There are some shared costs. So, for instance, our web business is based in Leatherhead in the same building as part of the assurance business. It's on a separate floor. It's an entire floor for web, so you'd say that is separable, and the cost of that will go with the business. Software testing is a little bit more mixed. There are people in different parts of the country, so if someone moved out of one office, we'd be left with the office cost, but with one less person in it. But the majority of costs that are non-systems and non-premises are directly in those businesses. So the EBIT figures you saw there are 2.7 million. There might be £500,000 or so of central costs that are being allocated into those two businesses. It's not particularly significant.
Thanks.
Ollie Nutt from Singers. Can you just talk us through the logic of retaining the product sales, particularly the third-party product sales, and then how, on the new structure, the cross-selling is going to work, particularly in regions that don't necessarily do a lot of product sale at the minute?
Yeah, so there's two, within NCC Group, there are two types of products. There's some products that we build ourselves that are entirely our own IP. So the high assurance product, the data diode product that we sell to the Dutch government is a product. It's literally a box that we sell them. We also have some cryptology products that we sell to customers, and we will keep selling them. The bit that we're not focusing on is third-party products. So, whoever's it might be, firewall products, third-party firewall products, servers to host firewalls, that I'm not particularly interested in. And in fact, as part of our positioning, we need to maintain a very clear independence from the hardware and other software vendors. Our value in the market is as an independent cybersecurity expert.
So, sorry, just to sort of follow that up, would it not have made sense as part of this review to maybe stop selling third-party product?
Well, we kind of have. If a customer, if we end up designing a solution for a customer and we end up passing through some product as part of an overall solution, we'll do that. But we're not focusing on, having a team of salespeople calling up trying to find opportunities to sell Jupyter boxes or Cisco systems or whoever else's, cybersecurity it's going to be. We have stopped that already.
And just to emphasize, in the UK business, you're talking about less than one handful of people who are dedicated to third-party product resale.
Yeah, I mean, it just adds up as big numbers of revenue really quickly, but it's not really doing anything for you either profit-wise or certainly not strategically, but it does flatter the revenue number.
Yeah. And obviously at the minute, most of the segmental analysis we've got is revenue-based, so it's quite useful to try and break it out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Kevin Ashton, Cantor Fitzgerald. Just on, you were talking about the order to cash and the significant potential to improve working capital, and you mentioned the 17 million or something accrued. Presumably that requires business, that is part of the whole business process adjustment as well. That's about getting to time, to milestones more quickly. I just wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that. And then just a second part of the same question, really, which is on the, you mentioned the age receivables, or at least that's in the notes of, and they've gone up a little bit, but there is something to do there too. Again, I'm assuming there are people who've been holding out. Maybe just elaborate a little bit on what you can do there.
Some of it is even more simple than what you described. Literally, and actually this is the history of how the revenue recognition issue was identified when I was reviewing working capital processes, which then flagged up that in our escrow business, one of our service lines raises invoices on the last day of the month. So we deliver services every day of the month, but for 29 days of the month, we raise no invoices. It all builds up as accrued income. Simple CEO question, CFO question, well, why don't we invoice every day? And the response is, hey, yeah, we could do that. Let's design a process to do it. So actually some of what can be done there, so it's not about actually having to prove milestones, whatever. Some of it's really, really basic. Actually getting the business, though, focused on, you know what, I've done the work, I'm going to prove it to the customer, and I'm going to get them to sign it off. That's a piece of it. Actually, this is debtors, but also accrued income. One of the reasons we don't raise bills is we start work without a purchase order. So you might have an email from the customer asking for it. It's all been properly authorized, but we all know you send the invoice into the AP team and they look at it and go, there's no PO. I don't care if the boss ordered it. I'm not paying it. There's no PO. So you'd be surprised how many people and how much time in the organization is spent chasing POs. The easiest time to get a PO is when someone places an order. I don't say it is easy, but it's certainly the easiest time. Because if you don't get it there, everything then backs up downstream of it. So actually, I think just getting some of those basics, invoicing every day, starting work with POs, pushing for POs early, etc., will actually, if you think of a congested system, it's removing so many blockages. You might get clear water then running through it, and that's when you can then start looking at proving, getting into milestone recognition and those sorts of conversations with customers.
And on the trade debtors, there's nothing unusual on the age there that you can't?
Well, believe it or not, some of our debtors, we actually do raise invoices without purchase orders, and of course then they're blocked. So yes, there's something to go at, and I think in the release we basically said if you just take everything over 60 days old, whether it's in accrued income or in aged debtors, there's £7 million there. Again, I don't know whether our overdue debtors should be 1 million, £500,000, but it should certainly be lower than it is today. So there's an opportunity to go after.
But I think it is worth saying we've not had, when we've chased, we've not had to do much writing off.
Yeah, I think our bad debt expense each year is a couple of £100,000. So again, it's not about recoverability, it's not about risk, it's actually just about the rapid flow of the cash through the system, shortening your working capital life cycle.
Hi, Damindu from Peel Hunt. In the strategic review, I guess you kind of dug into the competitive environment and how you sit within that. So what the market always believed was that there was a supply issue in this market. It was very hard to find talent. So going into this period of implementing the new model, which will disrupt the way people sat or reported and how they worked on a day-to-day basis, is there any risk of attrition creeping up and competition taking people away to provide them a comfort zone? Is that a worry you have, or how do you kind of view the competitive environment?
Yeah. Clearly, that is a risk, and we worry about it a lot. But it's an identified risk, and therefore we're putting risk mitigation strategies around it, which are all about communication, engagement, explaining what the model is designed to do, making sure that everybody who is impacted understands why we're making the change, and so we're selling the benefits to them. But it is, yeah, it's a risk. But to be clear, one of the reasons Rob would be nervous of making any changes was he wouldn't be able to think through, well, okay, at some point, I've got to do this really horrible, quite risky thing. Horrible's the wrong word. Boring, it's not exciting. But if I don't do it, I'm just making the problem worse and worse and worse. And that's what's happened. A lack of grasping these problems that, thousands of businesses have grappled with as they've gone through these growing pains, not dealing with them early enough, not thinking about what structures and processes are going to be appropriate for a business that's gone from 100 people to 1,800 people. That's what's led us to this crisis that happened last year, when suddenly everything did get out of control. So it is a risk, but I think we have to take it.
And in terms of systems implementation, maybe for Brian, how long will it take for you to get all the relevant KPIs in front of you? Are we kind of talking late 2018, or is it much earlier? Because you kind of suggested most of the systems are in place and it's just getting them implemented.
There's a difference between a system being in place and actually all its capacity being utilised. So, for example, we mentioned in the prelims that we can tell you the revenue number on consulting, we can tell you the revenue number on products, etc., unless we actually activate the flags in the systems to start capturing what sector is it in, which customer does it go to, what the margin attached to it is, what was the expected level of person who should have been working on that project. So there's quite a lot of data cleanup inside it. So you're talking about a journey that 2 years from now, we will be in a significantly better place. But what we're doing now is actually prioritizing. What are the things that actually we're kind of driving blind on? Let's get some visibility on those. I spoke to some people in February, March, around the time of the profit warning, said we'd already put in place an aged order book. We're still putting that together on a manual basis each month, but it's actually giving us some more granular level of visibility looking forward. So a 2-year program, but with some benefits in terms of reporting an MI actually coming in the space of a few months. The single biggest difference from, if you like, Chris and I sitting at the top of the shop is that we have a consolidation system that instead of taking 3 days to produce 1 month's set of consolidated numbers, you're talking 30 minutes, and that goes live. I'm looking at Martin now in September for August reporting. So that takes 3 days out, and suddenly it's a bit like unblocking working capital, etc. That frees up more time, which allows you to make other benefits and improvements, etc.
And for the time being, I assume you don't want to provide any new KPI, so therefore for us to monitor the progress, would gross margin and perhaps cash conversion be kind of the two things where we can see progress?
Until we actually come out with that granularity, yeah.
Those are the key benefits of the changes that we're trying to make. Drive up gross margin in a much better cash controls in the business. They're going to be blindingly obvious to everybody whether we've achieved that or not.
Okay.
All right, great.
Thank you
very much.